and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Welcome back this week, guys. Got something new and exciting to talk about, especially something that exists in relationships more than people want to admit. I'm not talking about cheating. I'm going to talk about betrayal this week, right? This is not even some massive relationship ending sort of deal. Today, we are going to be talking about the moment where somebody wants something sexually, emotionally, relationally, and the way how they've absolutely no idea what's going to happen if they tell you or say it out loud. And honestly, a lot of people never, ever do. They just kind of keep it inside of themselves, right? But before I go into this further, as I do every week, I want to say thank you to all of those of you keep listening, sharing the show, reaching out, talking in the comment section, sending me your ideas. I read this all, guys. I appreciate it. I want to see more comments. I want to get more of your emails. I want to hear from more of you around the world. So if you're new here, welcome. Glad you found your way inside. If this show has been helpful and you're following me on Spotify on the app, click on the app on those three little dots. Click the rating for me. Hit it for 5 stars. This allows other people to find the show. On YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe. That way you know when new episodes drop weekly, right? And if you want to support the work that I do here directly, there is a link in the show's description. All right, let's get back to it here. Now, a lot of people have something they haven't said to their partners before. Usually when people hear that sentence, right, tell you that, there's something I want to talk to you about, but never really told you before, right? A lot of times they'll go inward and they'll minimize it in their own head. They think, I mean something, like a passing curiosity or a small fantasy that showed up once and then just disappeared. It's not what I'm talking about today. I am talking about the thing that keeps coming back over and over in our minds, right? It's that idea somebody thinks about in the shower or laying beside their partner at night or sitting there staring at the ceiling afterward, wondering if this is just going to stay in their head forever because saying it feels riskier than carrying it. Now, you're probably asking, Chris, what are you talking about? Right? Well, we're going to get there, right? Because once you say what you want to say and it leaves your mouth, it's real. It's out there. And the other person in your life gets to react to it. Now they have to develop their own feelings about your comments and your thoughts. And this is where people start panicking internally because what they're actually afraid of isn't the answer itself. It's the look or the reaction on the other person's face before the answer comes, right? We're looking for any shifts or pauses in their behavior. The moment where someone suddenly feels exposed for even bringing up what's going on inside of them in the first place, right? And this is wrapped around shame and desire and erotic exploration. So let's get into this, right? What it doesn't, why it doesn't get said. The reason our desires or our fantasies often stay buried most of the time is because people already know that the reaction could hurt before they even open their mouth. That's really what's happening underneath all of this. People love saying things like, you should always be honest with your partner. But the reality feels very different when you're sitting there about to say something that could genuinely change the atmosphere between you and someone else. Especially if we're talking about our sex lives, our, power dynamics, our insecurities, how we are attracted to somebody, that could it affect our control, submission? What about our emotional needs? Any of this? Because now, this isn't an abstract concept anymore. This is now attached to who you are. And people know that once certain things are said, they can't be unsaid. You cannot unhear them. Even if the conversation goes fine, even if the relationship survives it, people know the other person is now going to see them, right? And through that information, they're going to view them in a new light. That's the fear. Not just, what if I say no? It's what if they see me differently afterward? And you can actually watch people wrestle with this internally sometimes. They start bringing up something and immediately begin softening it, right? While they're saying it. Oh, I don't know. Maybe this is just too weird, right? This is just probably stupid. You're going to think I'm just being ridiculous. And people start apologizing before they've even finished the sentence. And that tells you everything, because what they're really doing in that moment is trying to protect themselves from the shame before the shame even arrives, right? They're trying to cushion the impact in advance in case the other person reacts badly. And sometimes the desire itself is not even extreme. And that's the part people miss. Sometimes it's not about some huge taboo thing. Sometimes a person simply wants maybe more dominance or the softness, the cuddles, the backstrokes, the softer kisses, more attention, right? Maybe they just want to feel pursued, right? All of these things, even these smallest desires can feel enormous to someone when they touch insecurity, especially if somebody already carries shame around needing things emotionally or even sexually. People absolutely compare themselves during these moments. That's another part nobody likes admitting. Someone hears their partner say, they want something different, and immediately their mind starts racing towards what that means about them. Am I not enough? Did I fail somewhere? Am I inadequate? My God, where's this coming from? Have they watched this have they wanted this the whole time? Meanwhile, the other person is sitting there regretting they've said anything at all, because they can feel the shift happening in real time inside of that relationship dynamic. Whatever that looks like, right? Even a friends with benefits situation. And now that room that you're in has changed. And you feel it. One person is going to start getting quiet, and the other person is going to start talking too fast to compensate. Right? There's some nervous laughter, right? And then inevitably we arrive at, don't worry about it. It's fine. Forget it. And we do that way too quickly. And what's brutal about these conversations is that people are usually not reacting to what is said. They're reacting to what it touched inside of them. And this is something that, I've worked on with couples even recently, where a partner had a very simplistic thing that they wanted, but were so ashamed to bring forth because they thought it would make their partner view them differently. And another person I was working with, who was in a fairly new relationship, they wanted to push their exploration limits into things that they had discussed, but now because the relationship got real and the intensity got real, they didn't know how to say it. And that's the part for them they struggled with. The latter relationship ended because the desire for this activity they wanted to do was so strong, but they didn't know how to bring it up, and so they felt inadequate, and they ended the relationship. That's why these moments become emotionally charged so fast. A request can accidentally collide with insecurity, shame, jealousy, comparison, fear of abandonment, inadequacy, all kinds of things that were already sitting under the surface a long time before the conversation ever took place. So instead of that moment becoming, my partner trusts me enough to tell me something vulnerable, it suddenly becomes, what does this say about me? And once that happens, most people stop listening. Now they're defending themselves emotionally instead of hearing the other person, which is exactly why so many people keep these desires to themselves for years, decades, or never for their entire life, because they've already suspect that the conversation is not just going to be about the desire itself. They know it may also drag out every insecurity sitting quietly underneath the relationship too. And there was a few years ago, I was working with some people that, for the most part, very generically, were trying to see if they could come back together after a divorce. And the wife was trying to understand what led to the husband's infidelity. And this was it, because the act for him, he didn't want to be judged for what he thought would make him look less in her eyes. And so he thought the safest way to do this was to pay somebody, right? That way there's no attachment, no judgment, right? Go out and do this with somebody and then it's over. Of course, that's still a betrayal, but it does change the narrative of the betrayal. And it doesn't actually absolutely matter who's doing this. The reality is sometimes people view it this way because they think then at that moment that judgment is going to be worse than the exploration instead of trying to trust your partner with it. And if you all remember, about a year, maybe 2 years ago at this point, I've done a lot of shows. I had a couple on, and we were talking about parenting and the lifestyle and how you explain it to kids in those conversations. What was really interesting in that moment, that when we were in the midst of that discussion, the dominant had admitted, he wanted to try pegging. I'm like, that's a wonderful admission, right? There's no judgment there. Absolutely great. But I asked, when those words left your mouth, what was your reaction? And you can go back and I'm going to kind of paraphrase it, but it was that millisecond before she reacted, right? This is his wife, his submissive. Before she reacted, he's like, oh my God, I've said it. It's out there. I'm exposed. What's this going to mean, right? All these questions are going through our heads. She reacted enthusiastically. Absolutely. Let's get to it. Whatever you need. And they've, enjoy that healthier, the next evolution of their relationship together, right? Brought them closer together. But it's that millisecond. And that millisecond seems like a lifetime once we've said these things and they're out there, right? All of these things is because people already suspect the conversation is not going to be about the desire itself. They may know and they think and believe it's going to drag out every insecurity that sits quietly underneath that, the blanket of the relationship itself. This is why we hold tight to some of our desires and our fantasies and our taboos, right? So, what does it take to actually say it? Now, people don't just wake up one morning and suddenly decide to say something vulnerable to their partner, right? Hey, I want you to fist me while using KY jelly and singing Yankee Doodle Dandy, right? Now, I'm not going to tell you what parts of any of that are true, but there is a part of that is true, right? But the whole point is that no one just wakes up and says that, right? It's not how this happens. Most of the time, there's this long period before the conversation even occurs where somebody is thinking about it privately over and over and again and again. They're even searching for it online, seeing if they're the only ones who do this, right? They're looking up Yankee Doodle songs, whatever the case may be. I know you all are going to giggle along with me on that. And I actually repeat that part because that's the funny part, right? But you think that's something odd. It's not odd. People have all sorts of fantasies, right? And they do these things. They rehearse it internally and they bring it up in their head. They talk themselves out of wanting to do this. Then they circle back, to it a week later. And that back and forth goes on week after week, month after month. Because people, test the risk emotionally before they even test it out loud. They think about timing, the stress levels, if the relationship is stable enough, right? They're going to judge whether their partner seems distant lately, whether there's tension in the relationship. They start calculating every variable of that relationship quietly in their head because they're trying to reduce the chance of any humiliation before they even take the risk of saying it. And a lot of you are going to come out and say, but just tell me, we're so open, we do all of these things. Yeah, but there are deep recesses of the human psyche and sexual experience that we don't want to tell people because if we fear that judgment. We fear that our thoughts that we have that seem so dark to us might be just a Tuesday afternoon to somebody else. But we don't know how they're going to react. We don't know if it's going to be enthusiastic. And more often than not, in our heads, we just see worst case scenario, right? We see a catastrophic apocalyptic end. And not only that, in our heads, we're then going to say, oh my God, not only are they going to break up with me or end this marriage or whatever we're in, they're going to go out and tell everybody how much of a deviant I am when we're already in an environment where we're deviant, right? So that's why these conversations really come out clean or direct. Sometimes they leak out a little bit sideways. There's no pun intended in that, right? Though somebody's going to make a joke, right? It's really not entirely a joke, right? They linger on a topic during a movie a little longer than normal, right? And they're going to pretend all of this is just about curiosity, right? Because what people are doing is they're testing the emotional temperature of the room first. And that's the psychology underneath this. Human beings are constantly scanning for safety in relationships, especially around topics like vulnerability. And sexual vulnerability hits people particularly hard because it's tied to our identity, our desirability, acceptance, our shame, masculinity, femininity, control, our worth, all kinds of things people don't consciously think about until suddenly they feel exposed. So instead of saying what they want exactly, people start probing all around it. Again, no pun intended. But what they are doing is they're looking for signs. Did that person react negatively, to people who like this type of stuff? Are they judging them? Are they shutting down these conversations? Right? Are they shying away from it? Do they make jokes about this? People are gathering evidence. We are gathering that, right? Like this is a trial. And in our heads, we are going to go to trial with all that evidence. So a lot of people here then abandon the whole conversation before it starts because all these small reactions, right, from their partner, they're just equating everything to, oh my God, they're going to shut this down. They're looking at facial expressions, any dismissive comments, laughs don't go the right way, any sarcastic remarks about people who might be into that even realm of what we are curious or desiring. And all of that's just enough right there because that's going to shut somebody down. The other person immediately goes quiet and they start thinking to themselves, guess what? Fine, never mind. This is not a safe topic. I'm going to get judged. We're just going to move on. And then that desire goes back underground. And that happens constantly in relationships. It actually happens a lot more than I guarantee any of you think about with your partners. And if you tell me, oh, my partner has shared everything, we have done everything, there are things your partners right now are thinking about in the deepest, darkest corners of their mind that they're like curious about, especially as we get older, because our tastes evolve emotionally, psychologically, sexually. Our tastes change. And all of a sudden, what we didn't like before is like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I am interested in that. But now I've got to bring it up, right? Because I've been so adamant against this. And no, this is not me coming out about, I want to join the rope world, because that's just never going to happen. Stop asking me about rope. I love all you rope, masters out there. I think your work is awesome. There's still one person I follow and I look at his work out in Western Australia. I had him on the show. And I appreciate all you rope bunnies. I have some really great conversations because it's just not about rope, but you're not going to convert me. So that's never going to change for Chris. All right. Just get clear on that. Anyway, I don't want to deviate too much. But what starts going on inside is people then begin to negotiate against themselves. They minimize their own wants, right? Start saying stuff like, maybe I don't really need this. It's unrealistic. It's going to ruin my relationship. And I just need to appreciate what I have and kind of forget about this. And people do this all the time with their emotional and sexual needs, especially when they love the person they're with, because now the desire is competing against the fear of the loss. And that's where things get complicated psychologically, because once attachment enters the picture, honesty stops feeling simple. If somebody matters to you emotionally, risking any disapproval from them hits differently than risking disapproval from a stranger. that nervous system treats those situations completely different. Reaction from someone you're attracted and attached to feels heavier because it threatens your belonging. It threatens that closeness, right? Even part of your identity. So that's why a lot of people freeze. And the longer somebody carries this privately, the more emotionally loaded it becomes. Not necessarily because the desire itself is becoming bigger, but because the silence around it is becoming heavier. Because there's anticipation attached to it, fear, right? Even imagined conversations that have never happened are there. And some people have already lived through the entire argument in their head before any type of conversation has ever started. They've already imagined their partner getting angry, maybe being disgusted with them, pulling away, feeling hurt, feeling inadequate. They've already imagined the awkward silence afterwards and all that tension in bed later that night. That whole feeling of I should never have said anything in the first place. And by the way, what I'm describing is not what's actually going on. This is what people are doing in their heads. That entire thing, a million different ways. We're prejudging just because we think we know how it's going to go. So by the time somebody finally says something vulnerable like this, it usually means a lot more to the other person than they realize. Because no one's saying this casually. They are saying it after trying not to say it for a very long time. And that's the point we don't get, right? Especially when our identities, especially sexually, say so much about who we are. But here's the point, the moment it's said. What people imagine is usually far different than what actually happens when that conversation finally shows up. In their mind, they picture, they're going to say calmly, what they're thinking about. Their partner's going to calmly respond. Oh, there's a little surprise, some emotion. But that fantasy, everybody's just staying composed. Real conversations never look like that, right? It normally starts out eventually at some point because there's that pressure building like a steam, like a kettle, right? All of a sudden somebody just blurts out awkwardly after sitting on this for months or years, and they bring it up halfway through another conversation because they lost the nerve to create the perfect moment to say it. Sometimes it even comes out during sex or after sex. Sometimes during a fight where somebody suddenly says more than they meant to because they're emotionally overloaded already. But once it's out there, the whole atmosphere of that room changes. And that's the part that people remember afterward, not the exact words, the feeling, that look, that silence, the shift in someone's face. Human beings are extremely sensitive to emotional shifts, especially with people they're attached to. You can hear it in someone's breathing, right? The hesitation just before words leave their mouth. And the person who said the vulnerable thing notices every second of that. And that's what makes these moments feel so exposing and feels like they last an eternity. Once somebody says, I want this, or I think I need this, or, I've been thinking about, they immediately become hyper aware of the other person's reactions, breathing, tics, thoughts, looks, everything. And they are scanning aggressively for any sign of rejection, any eye contact that changes. That half-second pause suddenly feels enormous. That's why people often start backtracking almost immediately after they say something vulnerable. And you'll hear it happen in real time, you know, hey, I mean, it's not really a big deal. We don't have to. Just, you know what? Just forget it. Forget it. I don't even actually want it. It was stupid to even say it. The person who is trying to escape in real time the exposure they just created because now they feel emotionally naked, standing there waiting for a response. The listener is often having their own internal reaction at the exact same time. And that's what makes these conversations messy. The speaker thinks they're waiting for an answer, but meanwhile, the other person may already be spiraling internally themselves. What am I supposed to do? You know, what am I supposed to say to this? God, I'm feeling anxious. Why? Is this about me? Am I not enough? Am I being compared? What happens if I'm not okay with this? My God, what if I disappoint my partner right now? People freeze in these moments constantly, not because they're cruel, not because they don't care, but because their nervous system gets overloaded too. And a lot of people think that freeze only looks like panic or fear, but sometimes freeze looks incredibly subtle. And people can go flat in those moments and their face can lose complete expression and they just stare blankly because we forget when we have become vulnerable for our partner to hear something from us, we have to give them time to process it because also don't take into account that one part of that conversation is how they're going to feel once we say it and what that kind of is going to do in their mind, how that's going to kind of rattle around in there. And they're going to go through a myriad of responses, right? So all of a sudden, this room gets really heavy and both of you are going to feel it immediately. And that's the brutal part, right? You can watch shame appear on somebody's face in real time, once they sense any type of reaction, right? Even if they laugh odd, not because something's funny, it's just because their nervous system is trying to react. Shame exposure is physical, right? Our body's going to start reacting long before our mind catches up. But once both people become emotionally reactive at the same time, the actual conversation usually stops. Now both people are managing discomfort instead of hearing each other clearly. That's why these, moments stay with people for years. Not because conversations are dramatic or they were, something so immense, but it's because how exposed they felt standing inside of it. Now, I want to talk about where most people go wrong. A lot of these conversations go wrong is, normally happens really quickly. And it's in the first couple of seconds of the conversation, not because people are trying to be harmful, but they're not really sitting there thinking, how do I shut down my partner emotionally? But the reaction still lands that way because people often respond to their own emotional discomfort first before they even process what the other person is actually saying. And that's an important distinction that we need to understand. A lot of people think they're responding to the request itself, but they're not. They're responding to what the request makes them feel. That's why somebody can hear relatively small, simple thing and become defensive, withdrawn, sarcastic, insecure, or even emotionally cold. That request that hits something inside of them first, right? Something like inadequacy, or they're going to feel comparison, their own shame or fear, maybe that they're not enough sexually or emotionally. So now all of a sudden this conversation quietly stops being about understanding that other person, their partner's desires, and starts becoming about self-protection. And you can hear that when it happens, right? Somebody says, I've been waiting to talk to you about something. And the other person immediately tightens up before they even know what the conversation's about. Tonal changes, body, braces. Emotionally, we get rigid because all of that uncertainty makes a lot of people uncomfortable very quickly. And then the reactions come in. So where's this coming from? Are you unhappy? And we just start, right? Our mind starts racing. Did somebody put this idea in your head? Right? I thought it was, what we had was fine. That just sounds extreme. And sometimes none of those statements are even said aggressively. That's what makes it complicated. A person could sound calm and still completely shut down the moment emotionally. Hell, a laugh can do it. Facial expressions can do it. Silence too long can do it. Because once somebody finally becomes vulnerable, really vulnerable, especially when you add in the sexual component, they are watching the reaction in real time, probably more closely than normally watching anything else in that relationship. Our system starts scanning for the danger point, scanning for rejection or humiliation. So when that listener is, immediately makes the conversation about themselves, the person who disclosed that sexual vulnerability, right, feels stupid almost instantly. Now, instead of feeling heard, they're feeling judged, like they're the problem. And that's why people start retreating so quickly in these moments. And you'll hear it. Never mind. Forget I bring it up. We don't even have to talk about it. They just start the retreat. And what's happening here is not resolution, it's emotional withdrawal. The person is backing away because the exposure suddenly feels unsafe. And a lot of people don't realize how permanent these moments can land in a relationship. One bad reaction to vulnerability can silence somebody for years, not because the relationship is abusive, not because their partner's evil, simply because shame sticks hard when somebody feels exposed, especially sexually. People remember the look on their partner's face, that real awkward silence, or feeling even foolish for bringing something honest into the room. That's why reacting too quickly usually makes things worse. The listener becomes so busy managing their own emotional reaction, they stop hearing what is actually being shared. It becomes a defense. And once two people become defensive at the same time, the conversation usually collapses right there. Now, before I get into this next part, this episode is supported by Nothasar. Sometimes what gets brought up isn't subtle. It's that kind of moment that makes you pause because it might just be a lot to take in. And your first reaction isn't excitement, it's hesitation, maybe a bit of, I don't know about that. It's usually where people either get curious about it or lean into it. And that hesitancy isn't random. You can already feel what it might ask of you. It asks a bit more of you than you're used to giving. Nothasar's banner sits in that space. It's not something you rush into. It's something you approach slowly. You pay attention to it, actually stay present with as you figure out where your own limits are. And then you decide if you're going to move past them. So if you're someone who's open to that kind of experience, take a look at it. The link is in the show's description. All right, let's get back to it. So what actually helps here? One of the biggest reasons these conversations either deepen intimacy or completely damage it has very little to do with actual desire being discussed. Most of what it comes down to, right, is those first few minutes after disclosure. The stretch of time matters more than people realize because both people are emotionally activated already. And once that happens, human beings tend to speed up psychologically. They rush towards certainty because uncertainty feels difficult to sit in, right? So if one person says something that's vulnerable, almost immediately the other person feels pressure to figure out what it means. Are we okay? Is this a problem? Do I need to even respond right now? That internal pressure changes the emotional atmosphere fast. The conversation stops being about understanding and it starts becoming about stabilizing that discomfort. That usually is the moment where things begin collapsing unnecessarily. Because the most vulnerable disclosures don't actually require immediate resolution, they require room. Somebody saying, this is something I think about is not actually, or even automatically saying it needs to happen right now. Somebody opening up emotionally is not the same thing as demanding agreement. But people often react as though they're being cornered into an immediate decision. And once somebody feels cornered emotionally, that defensiveness shows up right behind it. So that's where curiosity changes the feeling of the conversation entirely, not fake, right? It's not polished therapy language here. It's just enough slowing down to actually understand what the other person means before deciding what the disclosure says about you. And People fill in blanks, aggressively when they feel insecure. Somebody hears one sentence and somebody builds an entire emotional narrative around it. You know, you want this becomes I'm not enough. You've been unhappy the whole time. You must want somebody else. I'm failing you somehow. Meanwhile, the person who became emotionally open, you know, they're sitting there thinking, that's not even what I meant. But that's the kind of escalation that happens consistently and constantly inside of these relationships because people react to the implication instead of the reality. Because more often than not, our nervous systems hears and scans for a threat before the mind fully understands the context of what's being said. So curiosity interrupts the process. Even small shifts matter here, right? Tell me more about that lands very differently than why would you want that? One opens a conversation and the other immediately puts somebody on a trial emotionally. Our tone, our timing, our body language, all that matter. People can feel the difference between someone trying to understand them and someone trying to defend themselves. And honestly, being heard regulates people far more than most realize. It's not about agreement or permission. It's not even about immediate acceptance. Just being heard. There's something that softens inside of people emotionally when somebody realizes they're not about to be attacked or mocked or even abandoned for telling the truth. You can actually feel people unclench emotionally when they stop bracing for rejection. It doesn't mean the other person has to agree with everything being discussed. The distinction matters a lot. Hearing something and agreeing to something are completely different experiences, and people confuse those two constantly. You can hear your partner fully and still not want the same things. You can understand the vulnerability without automatically consenting to the request, right? You can be there emotionally present with somebody without collapsing it into like panic or defensiveness. And most people don't realize how much safety is created simply by not reacting immediately. Because when somebody finally says something they've carried privately for months or years, their nervous system is already expecting danger because they're putting themselves out on the line. They have already braced and are waiting for rejection, the disgust, the shutdown, or the withdrawal. So when that reaction comes back slower and calmer and grounded, that changes something. The conversation stops feeling like exposure and starts feeling like connection. Not because everything suddenly became easy, because both people stayed in the moment long enough to actually hear each other before the fear took over. A lot of people in a lot of relationships carry things that were never said out loud, and some all their lives. Not necessarily because someone or somebody was being dishonest or they're trying to manipulate or hide some sort of massive secret. It's simply because a person never figured out how to risk being fully seen by someone they cared about. And the longer something stays hidden internally, the more emotionally loaded that tends to become. Not because the desire itself grows, but because the silence around it does. So people start managing the reactions before the conversation ever happens. Rehearse it, talk themselves out of it, convince themselves maybe it doesn't matter that much. Maybe they can live without it, because they're thinking bringing it up is going to create more tension where there is none. So I'd rather just stay quiet about what I want. And sometimes that silence just lasts and persists for years, not because there's something big or wrong with the relationship or the love isn't real, just because vulnerability is difficult when the stakes feel emotional. Because once you say something out loud, another person gets to respond to it. They get to see you through all of it. And for a lot of people, that level of exposure feels terrifying. But most people don't lose connection because of what they want. They lose it because things never get said. Eventually, there is a distance between who somebody is internally and what they actually allow the other person to know about them. And honestly, I think most people listening already know what their thing is. Something probably came to mind during this episode almost immediately for a lot of you. Not a random fantasy either, not some passing thought. The one thing you keep returning to privately and then pushing back down again every time you think about bringing it up. So here's my question for you all today to think about. If you had something you wanted to say, would you actually say it? Right? Let me know about your thoughts and your comments, what you thought about today. If you've ever experienced something like this, let's talk about it. Random acts of kindness, I haven't forgotten. Past weekend, did some more stuff. I ended up going to, again, local puppy shelter. I love dogs. I probably almost brought home an entire litter before I realized I just don't have the space. But I had a blast. Helped them raise some money. I think they raised about $5,000. I was really happy about that. But I want to hear more, not only in your comments about what you think about the episodes, but you guys to talk about the random acts of kindness, because they're important. We have all this division in the world. We have all this hatred in the world for other people we don't even know. We're already being told what to think. Start critically thinking. Free yourselves of it. You want change, make the change, right? So do some random acts of kindness. Let's hear about those too. Right? But think about this question. Think about this episode today. It's powerful. The things we really hold inside of us, that desire that we are just, and by the way, sometimes you finally explore your desire and you're like, my God, it was more often than not, we have built that up in our head to be so awesome. And it turns out not to be so great. And sometimes it turns out to be the best thing on the planet, right? It's like that first time you ate ice cream. You just never forget, right? First time, well, not everybody's first sex time, but you get what I'm saying. Okay. So one more time on my question. If you had something you wanted to say, would you actually say it? Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay tuned.